The Richard Lewis Esports Podcast. Taking you behind the scenes of the esports industry.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Richard Lewis Esports Podcast, aiming to take you behind the scenes of the esports industry. So the jingle claims. Anyway, this podcast, as always, is brought to you by our sponsor, Mad Cats, lovely people that we've worked with on many occasions and kindly offered to sponsor this podcast, even though they don't generally sponsor these kind of things. So it was incredibly kind of them. They make all sorts of great products for gaming. You know, they do all sorts of peripherals and whatnot. The one that I've been particularly keen to bring to the attention of all our listeners is the Mad Catz Rat Tournament Edition gaming mouse, which is available for PC and Mac. Retails at about $69.99. That's in pounds, the Queen Sterling. But the reason why I think it's a particularly good product, and I would certainly recommend it if you're the kind of person who likes prolonged periods of gaming, is that it's a fully customizable mouse. So you can move the plates around, so it's ergonomic. It fits to your hand. You could change the weight. So if you're the kind of person that likes to have, a lot of desk space and you need to make big sweeps, you can change the weight accordingly. Obviously, vice versa if you're one of those people who like to operate in a small, area of precision. And it's got very good DPI as well, which is it goes up to 8,200 DPI. But again, completely customizable. So if you're thinking about picking up a mouse, don't get me wrong, I know it looks a bit crazy, it looks like a transformer or whatever, but I definitely recommend them. So you can check them out by heading on over to the Mad Catz website. And anyway, on to my guest. Now, I've been wanting to interview this chap for ages, and I have no idea why it hasn't happened. He's somebody who's no doubt going to be well known within the League of Legends community. I would even go as far as to say somewhat notorious. He's operated as a manager, a coach, a person who has leaked things to the public quite famously, and is someone who always is forthcoming in their opinions about League of Legends. It is, of course, Olly Debeuf. Not to be confused with Olivier Dubois, or something that I might pronounce you, because I'm terrible with French pronunciation. So, Olly, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. How are you doing at the moment?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. A little bit less League of Legends than a few months ago, but it's a welcome change. Waiting for the new season, mostly. Waiting for this one to wrap up.
Well, yeah, you had a bit of a strange end to the season, and in fact I'm not even sure what you're currently doing at the moment. I was wondering if you could maybe kind of furnish, because I mean, look, I know obviously you left Millennium, and then I understand that you were in talks with some other organizations. I heard maybe Ninjas in Pajamas might have been one of them. You were offering your coaching services, and then I don't know, I haven't really heard much more beyond that. So what's been going on?
Right. So basically, when I left Millennium, I was looking for another team to coach. I never wanted to be a manager to begin with, but the state of Millennium at that point was that our previous manager had left / got released, and by the rule set that Riot employs, every team needs one general manager basically, who's not a starting player. So it was more of something I did while we were searching for a competent manager. So that's not something I'm looking to do in the future unless it's for my own organization. I don't want to work for other people when it comes to esports, because there's a lot of incompetence and lack of know-how from organizations. So I'd rather stay away from that.
So Millennium went really kind of sour, I felt, towards the end. It was a very strange situation that I watched unfold, because one of the things that I always presumed about Millennium, based on the way they presented themselves, to the public, was that all the players were friends, and therefore, by extension, the management, guys like yourself, would also be friends. Yet when the whole Millennium situation came to an end, it seemed that you and Aranea had a very, what's the word? I mean, I don't want to call it an argument per se, but you had very differing opinions about who was an issue within the team, and both of you kind of seemed to part on bad terms. What was the situation there?
Well, it was difficult because, like you said, Millennium didn't have a clear leadership, which means that if there were to be structural changes in the team, it would have to be agreed upon by all the players. So when it came to replacing someone or addressing one particular person due to poor performance or poor attitude, it would always be a real hassle because they live together like every other team, but they're also all equal owners of the team. So if you want to replace someone, it's not like in another team where your management will just send a nice letter to Riot explaining that this player is released and this player is hired. You would have to go through months of bureaucratic nonsense just to make sure the GBR, which is basically like the German equivalent of a limited liability corporation, would be able to transfer those shares to someone else. It was really difficult, and I'm not sure how it ended. I haven't really kept contact in regards to that because it's kind of private. But basically, what happened was, and there were definitely some mistakes from both sides. Like in retrospect, I handled it. I wouldn't say poorly, but I could have been a lot more kind, I suppose. Even though I didn't think at the time, and maybe still now, that it wasn't my job to be friends with the players as much as it was to make sure the results came in at the end of the month as far as LCS went. And when you win and when you're the best, like with Alternate before Creaton broke his hand in August, it's really easy to all be friends because there are no problems. Like, when you're number one, it's really easy to all get along. It's when things start going sour and when people start underperforming that the dynamic and the structure of a team or organization really is tested. So when the team started underperforming, basically the entire spring split until me and RNA left / got released. At the start, Alvar had his exams, so he couldn't practice much. We had to use substitutes for scrims. Everything was poorly organized. And like in every other sport, if you're not prepared, it's going to show. And I think we went 1 for 8 or 1 for 9 in the first few weeks, which is a complete opposite of how it started in the summer split the year before. For me, the issue at hand was clear. Aranea was underperforming, and because he underperformed, everyone kind of lost motivation. As a coach, I should have approached it differently. I should have tried to help him more individually. I always try to address people when everyone was together, so they don't feel singled out. But in hindsight, that was probably a poor idea. I should have individually approached him and tried to improve. But coaching was new to me as well, and I thought at that point in time that was the best way to go about it. Things didn't change. There wasn't much improving. Although at the end of I think it was IEM, there was some improvement, but it was already too late. We were already 8th place with like 10 or 13 wins from top 2, which is where you sort of want to be if you want to have a chance of going to Worlds. Even though at that point in time our focus was more to not drop out of the LCS. So at the end of towards the end of the split, I think there were 2 or 3 weeks left. I really pushed to replace Alvar because at that point in time that was what I deemed the best solution. After he and I left, the team did improve, and I believe they won a few, like 5 or 6 out of 7 games after he left, and after I left as well. So, take from that what you want. Maybe I was the problem as well. It's possible.
Well, I mean, I think Aranea did kind of almost intimate it. He kind of implied that part of the problem was yourself. And I think he kind of fell on his sword a little bit at the end. Like, I think he was very open that he was leaving and because he felt he'd been underperforming as well, which kind of must have put you in a strange position, because there he was saying, hey guys, I'm leaving because I'm underperforming, but did you know there's another problem in the team? It's our coach. And I remember when I interviewed him, when was it now? Katowice, I think it was. And I interviewed him, and I was talking about what was it like to have a coach like you, someone who was high profile in the media eye, and, always kind of passing comment about, certain things. He surprised me because he answered it very openly and said, well, actually, it is a distraction for the team. And I just stood there like, I didn't know what to sort of say next, like, because he'd actually said something I wasn't anticipating. I was expecting a PR bullshit response. I know you've said that you feel you could do things differently. Do you attribute any blame to yourself?
Yeah, of course. When the team underperforms, it's never just one person. Like I said, when there was no improvement with Aranea performance-wise, I definitely dropped the ball. I wasn't motivated either. Nobody was motivated. And I'm more of an analyst than a motivational coach. Like, I'm not that socially engaged, I guess, and that's how you put it. Whereas he, for example, like, I think with Fnatic, where he is now as a coach, he really has the ability to, like, motivate a team. I'm not sure if he's as good of an analyst as he is a motivator, but I think both things are equally important, because if you can motivate a team to keep scrimming even when they're losing, they'll improve as well. So at that point in time, I was a lot more focused on the essentials of the game and the gameplay, so the picks and the bans and minute 1 to the end, rather than what happened during scrims or players' confidence, stuff like that. I still think that's more for a sports psychologist to deal with rather than a coach/analyst. Mm-hmm. But in the current structure of how the LCS is formed and how organizations operate, there's only one team that has a sport psychologist, as far as I know, or any. It doesn't even have to be a psychologist. Just someone that's good with words and knows how to motivate people. Mm-hmm. So back to the point. When it was clear that it wasn't working out, I proposed to replace Aranea. Then I think a week later, he left, and from what I understand at this point is that he would only leave if they kicked me as well. And like I explained before, it was because we hit I should probably explain this as well. In the summer of 2013, I believe it was, we had Pharrell Lord on the team,
right?
Who we replaced for the same reason, basically. He underperformed and he mostly just underperformed.
Yeah.
And there was a huge hassle legally. It took us, when I left in February or March, I think, it still wasn't sorted out. And that's 8 months after he left, or 6 months, I'm not sure. So I think there's a combination of me not doing enough as a coach, even though I think as an analyst I did more than enough. I still talk to a lot of the more reputable players in the LCS about strategies, even at this point in time when I'm not a coach. So I don't think that's the issue. Most people know that my knowledge about the game is more than high enough to function properly as an analyst. But I've got the reputation I acquired when I first of all when I leaked some stuff. I think it was December or January this year and last year. But some people really decided to hold a grudge against me because of that. I guess to some point that's understandable. Although the people that hold a grudge against me have absolutely nothing to do with it, because the people who I actually to some extent hurt NIP wait, hold on. Yeah, it was Lemon Dogs and Ninjas of Pajamas, I think.
Yeah.
That were hurt. Yeah. So I even worked with the players from Lemon Dogs and then with the organization NIP earlier this year during relegations when they, ironically enough, played against Millennium and lost. So when he left the team, I was kicked basically. I didn't leave. I was kicked. I didn't know I was gonna get kicked until the moment it happened. I don't really blame anyone for that. I kind of thought it was gonna happen, but I didn't know anything officially. But that's just what you get when teams are structured with 5 owners who are also players who can't kick each other or replace anyone without a huge legal hassle.
So I want to ask, when all that happened and you ended up at NIP briefly, just helping them out on a trial run or whatever it was you want to call it, when you saw that you were going to play Millennium in the relegations, was there an extra bit of spice to that fixture? Like, were you going all out, leaking, information to the NIP players about how the old Millennium guys played, like doing everything you could so the NIP guys could beat them? And if that was the case, obviously I know you wanted NIP to win because that was who you were hoping to work for if they made it into LCS. How did you feel when NIP lost?
Well, when I joined NIP, it was almost certain already that we were gonna face Millennium. The players in Millennium that are still there now, Kerp and mostly Create and Jerry and Kerp, I still consider them friends. I still talk to them a lot. Even after I got kicked from Millennium, I still went out partying sometimes with Create, and so there are definitely no grudges there. As far as the games against them in the promotion tournament were concerned, I would have done the same if it were Fnatic or SK or Millennium. There wasn't a big difference. Not to mention that it was since I left them to the point where I joined NIP, there were a ton of patches. The game changed pretty dramatically from what I remember. There was still like the Ziggs and the LeBlanc meta that was still kind of the same. But everything I knew from Millennium, I could have figured out from just, doing the normal research I would do for any other team. So I don't think that mattered too much. And I was there at relegations, and when Millennium lost the first game, I even told Creed, come on, you can still win. Because for me, it was kind of mixed feelings because I really like Create Down and Jerry and Kerp and Kevin also to some extent. But since he only joined Millennium in January, whereas I was with the others since the summer split when Kevin was in SK, we didn't really talk much or get along well. I don't think there's bad blood, but we just didn't talk much, so I don't really have a connection with him. But when NIP actually lost, it was obviously it was shitty because I was, like you said, I was hoping to work for NIP in the LCS. Didn't really have a job after that. Well, I did, but that's beside the point. At that point, I thought I wasn't going to, be able to coach anyone in the near future. So obviously it was shitty because, well, they lost and we did prepare a lot, and it's mostly the way we lost because when you prepare for something and then you lose because someone chokes really hard, it's really a bummer because the player who actually is one of the unluckiest people I've ever known, Freeze.
This is who we're talking about, Freeze.
Yeah, Freeze.
Okay. Why is he unlucky?
Well, in my opinion, he's probably right now, even now that he's in my opinion, a really shit team. The current roster of NIP is horrible. Alex is underperforming. Their jungler is everyone's bad besides Freeze on that team basically. And when he left Lemon Dogs, he helped wait, hold on. Was he? No, it was Tabs and Lemon Noise.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. When he joined the new NIP after being in NIP with Extinct and Bjergsen, he dropped out of the LCS because they didn't requalify after losing to KMT, where he performed great individually, and the rest of the team wasn't overconfident or arrogant. I'm not sure what it was, but they lost. So that's the first time they lost, and he got boned out of the LCS. Then the second time was the relegations where I was with them. He played brilliant. I don't think he died more than once in 3 games, like once or twice, and he did everything near perfect with Mithy. But the jungler was the main issue there, so he got boned out of the LCS again. And now this time around, the two best players in NIP got banned, and one player retired, and he got boned out of the LCS again, even though he won his lane 3 games in a row, and he just played really good. Like, I think he's top 3 AD carries in Europe.
It's crazy to think. I mean, his future could have panned out incredibly differently, because when that first super team in inverted commas was being talked about, and Edward was saying, I'll play in this team if we get Freeze to play alongside me. He's the best AD carry, I think, and he said that publicly on a number of occasions. I think if we had that happen, I think Freeze probably, as you're right, he would be getting the kind of recognition he deserves. And I think he is an immensely talented player. But he was, if I remember rightly, he was under a contract, and it was going to cost them quite a bit of money to buy him out. So they decided not to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you're right. I think he was contracted to NIP at that point. So they decided to go with, no one, I guess, since it didn't really happen.
Yeah.
They went with Tabs. I think only one player from the original super team was Shook. Shook.
Yeah.
Was still in there. I'm not sure. I don't.
Yeah, it was Froggen and Shook basically were the only 2 survivors from the original.
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be like Froggen, Shook, JWoww, and then Edward and Freeze.
That's right. That was the original.
Serves.
That was the original team that was playing together.
Yeah.
But yeah, you say, are we saying that Freeze choked in that Millennium game?
No, Freeze didn't. Freeze played great.
Good. No. I was going to say.
Yeah,
So who was the choker?
Gilberto, the jungler.
Yeah.
For NIP, who has since, as I understand, not played a single game of League of Legends. I don't think he's completely retired. He's not touched the game anymore.
But everyone was talking about him as being some incredible potential prospect. That he was going to be the next, big thing. Did they discover a real gem?
Who, Gilberto?
Yeah.
No, they only played with him because Eamon was too young. And they had been, I think NIP, the management has made some very questionable judgment calls in the past years, I guess it's now. When they got Gilberto, there were 2 other really good solo queue junglers that were teamless. There was Trashy, who now plays for H2K, who plays for H2K. And there was Santorin, who plays for Coast now, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. And they chose to go with Gilberto, who I never thought was a good jungler. He was one of those classic solo queue junglers. In scrims, he would do well because there's 0 pressure on you. You can do extremely risky plays, and if it doesn't work out, you just remake.
Yeah.
But on LAN, he did nothing basically. He just farmed for 40 minutes and then they lost. That's basically what happened every single time.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so after those relegations, they obviously kicked Gilberto, and then they tried. They were looking for a new jungler. So Eamon was available, but they didn't go with him because he lacked motivation to play competitively just in Challengers team, because they still wanted to scrim 7 hours a day, or 6 or 8, whatever, standard LCS time blocks. But when they played with him the first time, I don't think they dropped more than 2 games, and they basically won like every scrim, so it didn't feel like it was worth to practice so much. So Eamon declined, from what I know, or they didn't even ask him because they knew he was going to decline. And then they had to choose between Cow, the one they picked, and Trashy, who's basically one of the best junglers in Europe right now, and it was at that point as well. He played with Reason Gaming then, who was a really horrible team, and every time they won, he was just like 10-0 or something, so he was just carrying them really hard. And I remember telling the NIP management, he shouldn't take Cow. He's basically just Eamon 2.0, like he's 16 years old. He plays like 3 champions, and he plays the exact same style, like as Gilberto, superstar in scrims and solo queue, because he just like tower dives with Lee Sin. But, he's immature, and you're going to have the same problems. And they chose to go with him anyway, and, you see what happened. It happened really quickly, actually, but they already made the choice, and then Trashy joined H2K, so they couldn't replace Cow anymore.
Yeah.
So they kind of, that didn't really work out for them either.
I mean, what do you make of the NIP team altogether? I got to ask you about this, because when you were thinking this is going to be my next destination for a job, I mean, they had players there that were known to sort of, be rages, and Riot had, talked about this kind of, they weren't going to tolerate it from the professional players. And it just seemed like that team, it had some great individuals on paper, like in terms of ability, but it always felt that they were a potential disaster waiting to happen, that there was always going to be a disciplinary issue, or there was always going to be a controversy. And NIP had just been soaked in controversy since the team came into existence. The whole Lemon Dogs thing, everything, money disappearing, with the managers. It was just one, piece of bad PR after another. And that's before we even get into the whole, Copenhagen Wolves, roster situation as well. Yeah. So why did you think that was a sort of sensible destination for somebody with your ambitions?
Basically, when I joined them, I think it was 1 month to relegations to the promotion matches. So, realistically, you're not gonna change the dynamic of a team. Like, you can change the dynamic of a team over the off season, because if you have to radically change something, they're gonna perform worse for a few weeks, and then it starts building up, and then eventually it'll be a lot better. But if you have 1 month, then you shouldn't start changing everything, because it might just completely backfire. And so we chose to, because eventually, like, they were, at that time, they were doing great in the challenger scene. Like, they were winning everything, even though they had like poor training schedules, poor attitudes. So I figured, like, let's just keep that for what it is and focus on the actual gameplay, the picks, the bans, rotations, etc.
Yeah.
And it worked out pretty well, until obviously the matches. When I went to Copenhagen Games with them, I don't think. Oh yeah, they dropped one game because Nukeduck slept late and you had to forfeit one. That's the only game they lost, and they won everything else. Like, at the end, it was 17-0, I think, or 16-0, and they won the tournament. So there was there was no bad omen at that point that you could say, maybe we should change something after all, because it's not going to work out. So we went into relegations with like really good confidence, basically. But
yeah, I remember I talked to Nukeduck quite a bit at and the managers as well, and Heaton actually at Copenhagen Games just before the relegation, and everybody was so confident that they were going to beat Millennium. Yeah. Well,
Millennium thought they were going to get 3-0. Like, I remember talking to them after, and then they're like, okay, well, I can't really believe what just happened. I can't really believe we won, because we were supposed to lose. Like, Millennium didn't practice at all. Like, I remember, like, stalking all their accounts and seeing they play, like, 5 games
Yeah.
In like 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, so this is like 3-0 free win. And after the first game they played, Millennium lost the first game in the relegations to then win the next 3 consecutively, if I recall correctly. So what happened after the first game? We're like, okay, this is what we expected to lose in 20 minutes. And I remember Cretan saying, 2 more, because he thought, 2 more games and we're done for. And then they randomly start picking these champions we've never played before and completely choking in champion select, and then, picking worthless champions into good champions. And in League of Legends, it happens pretty quickly. Like, once it goes downhill, you lose confidence. You stop making, risky plays, which you should.
Yeah.
And, well, then they just lost the 3 next games. The biggest problem with NIP was definitely the attitudes. Nuke Duck's attitude is horrible. I remember.
In what way?
He's a great player and he's really talented. But he's super arrogant. He's very irresponsible. Like, he would, even at Copenhagen games, granted, we were NIP was probably going to win that regardless, but he would stay up until like 5 or 6 a.m. when he had to play at 9 a.m. and then he came late. And because we could have actually gotten knocked out of the tournament on the first day, because we didn't know we had a game taken from us.
Right.
And it was a best out of 3, so 2 games and you're done for, or best out. Actually, I don't remember. I think it was best out of 3 or best out of 2.
Yeah.
So, or best out of 1. So they actually trolled a bit, because our first opponents were like, they were bad players. It was just a local team, and they took really random picks, and they actually barely won it. And then afterwards, we noticed that if we had lost that game, the enemy would have had 2-0, so it would have been over. So, just stuff like that, and not wanting to take scrim seriously, doesn't really listen to other people when they, like, say those champions aren't really relevant anymore. Like Zed at that time was the beginning of the end for Zed. Exhaust got buffed. Soraka mid was basically everywhere.
Yeah.
And he kind of refused to, pick up Syndra, Orianna, Ahri, the champions everyone basically played 2 weeks after that or 3 weeks after that. And I think that's just gonna, bite him in the ass in the long run. Especially, now he's banned. Like, he got fined by Riot, and then he got banned for still being toxic.
How do you feel about that? The whole ban for, toxicity and whatnot in solo queue?
He was toxic, but not, in a racist kind of way or anything. Well, not in solo queue at least. But yeah, I think it was justified.
Do you think banning players for that sort of thing is justified in general? I don't know how I feel about it sometimes. Like, sometimes it feels justified, and then other times it feels a little bit over the top. I
think if you get fined for being toxic, and then you still don't change, there's only so much. Like, Riot can't fine them for like $5,000 just because they're toxic. So
yeah,
I guess it was a logical step to take. I'm not sure if it was the right one. I think it was way too long to begin with. Like, banning someone for the remainder of a season for being toxic in solo queues is fucking ridiculous. But I think like a 1 or 2 month ban would have been, decent. But Riot decision making is just not in their book, and it's not how they do things.
Yeah.
They often don't really. They have very questionable decision making at times. Let me put it like that.
What about Zorozero in all of this? I think he was being heralded as one of the greatest top laners, in the world at that time. I know CLG were interested in picking him up. That wasn't just bunkum, but he wanted to concentrate on his studies. I think a lot of people feel that his career kind of fizzled out. It wasn't commensurate with his talents. What did you make of him?
the only problem Zorozero had was his champion pool at the relegations. He didn't play Jax, which was basically probably one of the reasons why we lost, because he was pick or ban, and we didn't play him, so we had to ban him every single time, which means they got other picks that were supposed to be picked or banned, and that kind of fucked us over. But that's probably to some extent my fault as well, because I didn't pressure him to play it, because he's really talented, and he needs, like, if he wants to learn a champion, he'll play 100 solo queue games, and then he'll be the best at it in Europe for sure, and in A probably. Like, the hype he got was definitely deserved. He was definitely the best player in top lane at that point in time. But if you only have 3/4 of the engine, then it doesn't matter how good the other 3/4 are. If you lack the one part, it's still not gonna, drive. So that's why he underperformed, so to speak. But I think if he comes back after he's done with school next year and he plays 500 solo queue games, he's probably going to be the best player in Europe again. As far as top lane goes, that is.
I mean, do you think he will be looking to come back?
Yeah, he will. Okay. I've already spoken to him briefly, and he'll come back.
Awesome. So we've touched upon toxicity and bans and that kind of thing. I think it's only fair we sort of put you under the microscope a little bit at this point and ask you some questions about your own behavior
sure.
At various points. So I want to ask you about the whole leaking thing. I think there was a period of time when you were perhaps better known as being that guy who leaks things on Twitter and social media, rather than a coach or a manager or an analyst or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, if I remember rightly, the things that you leaked in particular were... Well, in fact, no, you tell us. What are your greatest hits?
I think it... shit, I don't really remember. I think it started with the whole EG going to NA thing. Like, you get fucked out of the LCS here, so you just buy your spot somewhere else. Yellow Pete, Crepo, wait, did someone else go? Oh, yeah, Snoopy.
Snoopy, yeah.
Yeah. They went to NA. They bought, like, the reason I leaked it was because I thought it was one of the most stupid things I'd ever read. Like, just buying your way into a competition shouldn't be possible. Especially because they weren't, mediocre, couldn't make top 2. They were horrible here. They were the worst players in their role, all 3 of them. So seeing them get away with something like that is a little annoying. Well, right now, if it happened again, I probably wouldn't give a shit about it. But at that point, it really agitated me. So I decided to, leak it to no actual purpose, because nothing came of it. I hoped Riot was going to, prevent that from happening. So then it happened again a month later with NIP and Lemon Dog. So I did it again, and then it did help to some extent, although I'm not sure if my leaking had anything to do with that, but it did create a lot of drama, I guess. So we'll never know. But I mostly did it because I thought it was incredibly stupid.
What was the time when I remember Quickshot and D-Man, I think, had a go at you on Twitter? They got upset about something you put out there.
I think that was just Quickshot, but hold on, let me recall. I think it had something to do with streaming.
Yeah, it was to do with they weren't going to stream a game. That was it. You're right.
Oh, right. Hold on. So I got that information. A manager, the manager of the team, who were in the qualifiers, told me they weren't going to be streamed
to avoid DDoSing and
to avoid DDoSing, because it was online. And I think I posted on Reddit that they weren't going to be streamed, but I wasn't sure, so they should wait for a response, like an official statement from Riot. Well, hold on one second.
Oh, bless you.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
So, Quickshot actually apologized after that because for some reason he decided to read like the first 2 sentences of a 3-sentence post, which is what I've come to expect from him at this point in time. But yeah, he got ticked off for some reason because I said that, and yeah, that's about it. I think he did apologize later, and I saw him at the LCS a few times after that, and he never brought anything up. So I'm not sure what that was all about. I personally don't really care because he's a shoutcaster, and his opinion of anything other than what has to do directly with his job is fairly unimportant to me. Like if he has an interesting comment on League of Legends or shoutcasting, I'll gladly listen to that and discuss it. But anything else, it's just not that interesting to me.
So, I mean, I always thought you were kind of doing these, if you like, public service announcements to benefit, well, A, players, and B, almost like the integrity of the league. But a lot of people seem to get upset about it. So can you explain your motivations and some of the reactions that you'd had?
Yeah, basically, the first time around, like I said just now, was because I thought it was incredibly stupid that was possible to just buy a spot after getting knocked out in one region, just buy a spot in the other. And the second time, it was because some people I wouldn't say friends, some people I know were getting basically ripped off by management from organizations because they didn't have the legal know-how to protect themselves. So I talked to those players, and they were obviously all very upset because when you're semi-pro in League of Legends, you play 10 hours a day for 8 hours to stay in Challenger or stay high in Challenger. And then they play, well, they weren't great to begin with. Like, they weren't like a great roster, but that doesn't really matter. Like, you need to give them a chance.
Yeah.
They were contracted to Lemon Dogs, if I recall correctly, at that point in time. So they were contracted to Lemon Dogs, and then for some odd reason, I still think to this day it was just like in bad faith. Like Lemon Dogs made those contracts in bad faith to ensure that if the roster did not prove to be viable to like stay in the LCS, they would just sell the slot to NIP.
Yeah.
And that ticked me off, and so I did what I thought at that point in time was the best to prevent that from happening. I'm pretty sure what my leaking didn't have anything to do with it at that point when Riot said, no, it's not going to happen again, because they already got a shitload of criticism for letting it happen with EG.
I mean, this is the other key thing I think to remember in all of this. I mean, when I was investigating the whole NIP and Lemon Dogs thing, it was abundantly clear that Riot were very well aware of the relationship between the two organizations. And in fact, the player liaison officer that was dealing with both of them, we had it on record through all the interviews I did, would actually often speak to NIP management for matters pertaining to Lemon Dogs. They considered them a point of contact. Now, the idea that Riot weren't aware about EG or about the Lemon Dogs NIP situation seems a little naive if people think that Riot were at any point going to intervene to prevent these things happening. I mean, I think EG such an important brand for League of Legends. They're almost a law unto themselves. I don't know how you feel about that.
Of course, Riot knew what was happening, but like I said, their decision-making has been very questionable at certain points in time, so they let it happen with EG. Mostly, like you say, I think because at that point in time, I think those 3 players were actually the players with like top 5 most Twitter followers and Facebook followers in Europe. They were like the TSM and CLG equivalent of NA, so I guess they let it happen to not, lose 300,000 fans in one clean sweep.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that was the case, but that's what, the logic would suggest.
Mm.
So, I'm pretty, like you say, I'm pretty sure they knew exactly what was going to happen. Because I don't think EG would, try something like that without Riot's at least a silent agreement.
Yeah,
I don't think they ever agreed on paper, but they probably didn't disagree. So
the way I always looked at it and the way it had been explained to me behind the scenes was they pretty much helped direct, EG to the loopholes they would need to jump through in order to ensure that they could do what they did. And then obviously retroactively they made some changes or reforms or whatever you want to call it, so it wouldn't be necessarily viable for other teams to do. But of course, I mean, we've seen there's lots of close ties between other organizations anyway. I mean, we know that TSM and Cloud9 are effectively sister teams in NA, and no one really likes to talk about this too much. And that's not for me to suggest there's been anything untoward in their relationship, but I'm pretty sure if we were to look at it, there would be some overlap that may be troubling within the context of competitive integrity.
Yeah, well, I think because esports is so small right now, people like to say it's getting really big, but if you compare it to NFL or soccer, or it's actually really small.
Mm-hmm.
The industry doesn't make much money yet. You can just see that by the total absence of big sponsors.
Mm.
I mean, you've got Nvidia and Intel sponsoring, but I can assure you that's not for the same amounts they would sponsor a football team or something like that. So, to some extent, I think it's fine that these things exist. Like you said, the TSM and Cloud9 stuff, because if you make things too difficult for the few big organizations that there are now, and the actual competitive integrity isn't affected, I think it's fine for now. Maybe in the future that should change. But I think if you start harping on stuff like that now, it's just gonna set esports back another year. I'm not sure. I think it's not necessary, because I don't think there would be any collusion or match fixing to have C9 and TSM go to Worlds together, stuff like that. Maybe there would be. You can never know unless you have your sources that could confirm it. But I don't think that would happen at this point in time.
I mean, we've got an interesting potential at Worlds. Actually, this is a bit of a tangent, but that's how we do things on the podcast. With the Samsung teams.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think a lot of people have said Riot will try and keep them apart, but I mean, I guess if there's any form of intervention, doesn't that raise questions potentially about again this idea of competitive integrity?
Well, to begin with, I don't see how a game that Riot owns the license to can have different, so dramatically different rules in two different places where eventually they will compete with the other regions for the big money, the grand prize. I think that's beyond me how that's possible. If there's no brother and sister teams here in North America, there shouldn't be any in Korea, China, Taiwan, or the Philippines or whatever is left. But if it were to happen, I think I don't think the Samsung teams are going to play each other anytime soon, in the early stages. So when it does happen in the later stages, it's going to be less important, because if the better team is going to win regardless. I think if they play against each other, I think the biggest problem is when they have to play against each other for first and second in groups or something. Say that Samsung Blue, or I think or Ozone, just Samsung won is like number 1 with 4-0 in groups, and Samsung 2 is like 3rd place, then you have to ask yourself the question: is it responsible to let those teams play against each other to decide who's going to be the second seed to go through the group stage?
Yeah.
I hope Riot doesn't let that happen. I can't imagine that they will. That would be incredibly stupid.
I wanted to ask you actually some questions about some of the match fixing stuff that's plagued League of Legends. I mean, it's not just a League of Legends specific problem. Obviously, we've seen it in StarCraft and Dota. It's definitely cropped up in other games from time to time. But I just wanted to know, and this might sound like a super weird question, but I see obviously you've got the high end stuff in Korea, like the whole thing that happened with Promise and how that situation degenerated into a near tragedy. And then we've also seen challenger teams being accused of, kind of doing some shady stuff as well. What's your take on it? Have you come across anything like that? Has anyone ever offered, hey guys, want to throw a game? Has that ever come up?
I think it still happens a lot. People are just smarter about it. I remember, I'm not sure if it was in winter or last season, the fall championship in OGN. But at some point, SKT K was playing against SKTS. I think it was in group stage to decide whether SKTS would advance, and SKTK lost those games, so SKTS advanced, and it looked really shady because those teams were making mistakes. Well, SKTK was making mistakes they hadn't made in the last year. But proving that it's actually match fixing and not just, a bad game is near impossible unless you have access to, logs and like in-game sound files and such. But I'm pretty sure that if SKTK had tried to win those games, like they would any other, without knowing in the back of their head, like if we lose, SKTS advances and nothing bad happens for us, I think those games will turn out completely different. So, but that's unavoidable when you allow brother and sister teams to play in the same league.
Yeah. So have you never had anything a bit closer to home? No one's ever said, "Oh, Ollie, let's face it, your team, like when you were at Millennium, for example, Millennium aren't going to do anything this season. Come on, we can get into playoffs or whatever." Did anyone ever have those kind of conversations?
No, but there was one event last split with NIP where not last split. At playoffs in August 2013, Lemon Dogs was ranked first, and they played against, I think it was SK Gaming. I'm not sure if it was them. And Nuktak decided to go Ezreal mid,
right?
Which was like a blind pick Ezreal mid, which is something you would never, ever, ever see if the game didn't matter. But it mattered a lot for the other team because they were 7, we were 8, I think. And the winner of that basically went to Gamescom. That was something that seemed a little odd to me because it's really stupid to do, because when you do something like that, the entire world's gonna think you fixed that match. So on the one side you've got the path where the game didn't matter for Lemon Dog, so they just didn't try to win. They just played for fun, which is possible. And on the other hand, there could have been, some foul play, which I think actually was the case, but it's impossible to prove. So, yeah, there's not much to say about that.
Do you think Riot want to clamp down on it? Because it's like you say, I mean, effectively, we're not really at the stage where we can consider this a kind of sport yet. I mean, it's still it straddles the boundaries between being a sport and an entertainment product. And if you suddenly were to start turning over every stone and punishing people equally, across all the boards or appropriately, as it would be done in any other sport, you might find yourself in a very difficult position moving forward. You'd potentially isolate fans, you'd potentially lose players. Organizations might even pull out of having teams for your game. So, well, I mean, do you think Riot want to get on top of this?
I don't think it's as much of a problem that they're not on top of it as that they're extremely inconsistent with how they handle every case individually. Mm-hmm. Like when you look at Forgiven, last split, he was one of the most toxic players I've ever encountered in my life. Mm-hmm. He would flame the shit out of you on his main LCS account in solo queue if you perform poorly. And then I think they fined him, but at the same time, when that happened, a year before, they banned Shook for an entire season and 4 other players, if I recall correctly, and he was at least equally toxic as Shook was then.
Yeah.
So then you have to ask yourself the question: what are you doing? Because if you're gonna ban 5 players for an entire season without previous warning, that they're gonna be banned from competitive play, which is completely different than having your account permanently banned. And then Forgiven comes around and he's insanely toxic for a very long period of time. Like he flamed basically the entire LCS season through.
So why would you think Forgiven would get a pass, but someone like Shook wouldn't? Because there are inconsistencies, no doubt about it. Like Sheep, who is at Coast at the moment, he was banned under the name Best Ash Africa. That account was permanently banned, and yet he was allowed to play for XDG.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like, you can't know what they're thinking. I think in the case of Forgiven, it was extremely obvious that he was the only person in Copenhagen Wolves that was performing. Together with Amazing. I apologize. Together with Amazing. So if they kicked Forgiven, you're basically already locked in your place 8 team. I mean, just look at this split. Like, it just confirms that notion. So if they had banned him, they would like already lose X amount of viewers because 1 out of 8 teams already had 0 chance of qualifying for Worlds or even stay in the LCS on the same level, So I think it's really hard to judge because you don't know maybe Forgiven was warned personally but not publicly. Maybe. I'm not sure because it's very strange how they approach these issues. Like the same problem with Incarnation, for example, who allegedly DDoS players, which they never actually had any proof of. This it's just hearsay. They had one screenshot with basically a copy paste of something a Skype resolver does, which is not the same thing as DDoSing by a long shot. And then they lifetime or indefinitely ban him. And then when the same thing happens with Super Ace, for example, who everyone knows DDoSed with NIQ, who is now in Gambit. 2 years ago, they were notorious DDoSers, but no consequence follows from that because it's normal that there's no consequence because they have 0 proof.
Yeah.
They have nothing to show for when they say, player X or player Y DDoS, because the nature of DDoSing is that it's not your own IP. So unless you publicly admit that you DDoS someone, they basically cannot know.
So how did they manage to arrive at the decision to ban Incarnation then?
Well, from what I understand, January 1st, I'm just going to take that date because he got banned January 17th, I think. They said you can't flame anymore and you have to stop being toxic. or you're not going to play the LCS qualifiers.
Mm.
So obviously, at that point, everyone in that team stopped being toxic. Like they were young, but they're not completely retarded, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then 17 days later, or 2 weeks later, they get the notice that they've all been banned. So it's very strange. I'm not sure how that happened. I think it's like it comes down to the player behavior team not cooperating or working properly with the esports department,
mm-hmm.
which is sort of what Nick Allen confirmed last year when they wanted to unban him, and the player behavior department did not want that at that point in time. I think this has changed by now,
mm-hmm.
since they've allowed him to coach SK and play solo queue for the last 8 months. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm not sure how it happened. When they did ban him, the decision came from the player behavior team rather than the esports department. So it's very strange.
Yeah, I mean, what can you tell us about sort of your dealings with Riot then? Because it sounds a really, convoluted kind of organization. I mean, Nick Allen, I think for most people, is the face of esports and all the esports output that comes out of Riot. So I think most people would have thought, well, actually, like Nick's the guy, he's the big cheese making the decisions about all of these. He always seems to be the guy that's articulating why decisions have been taken. He's the guy who's always on social media. So it's actually this player behavior team that, are really calling the shot.
At that point in time, yes. I think now this has actually changed because when like Nuke Duck and Mithy were fined, the decisions, from what I understand, came from the esports department rather than the player behavior team. But when I dealt with Riot in the past year, basically year and a half, it's very, very inconsistent. They will say A one day and then they'll say B the next day, and the day after that they don't even remember what they said and they ask the same question again. I think the main problem with Riot is that they hire only talented people, so to speak. They have no one with actual experience of running these big events, these big competitions. And, well, I guess it's normal. The LCS is completely new to, esports. I mean, esports is new. There are going to be some issues at the beginning, but some things should have been fixed a lot sooner than they actually were. And I think it's important moving on towards the future that they do find some sort of consistency when they make these decisions that affect players and fans, mostly players, their lives, and fans, their experience of the game. But right now that doesn't seem to be the case. Like, when you look at how the game has basically come to, well, not really stalemate, but the gameplay itself is, for me at least, as someone who really looks at the games statistically and analytically, rather than, just turn on the stream and, oh, look, there's these 10 champions playing with these 10 players behind them. You see that there's the same issues are coming back every few months, just under a different form. Like, instead of champion, like, for example, last split, it was Dr. Mundo, Shyvana, and Renekton.
Yeah.
The three ones that were completely imbalanced for 5 months, which is incomprehensible to me, how you can leave the same three champions in the same state for 5 months when you're running a competitive scene. And then now there's the same problem with Morgana, who hasn't been touched at all. Every pro player, and by now I think every player that's above Platinum 5 knows this is the best support in the game by a long shot. Yet Riot nerfs and buffs everything besides her. I'm not sure why. They never give any explanation as to why they make these decisions or do not make these decisions. So,
well, I'm glad you've got on game balance. I did want to ask your thoughts about it. I mean, it seems to me, and I've made this point And sometimes, depending on what time of day you make it, it seems to be popular or unpopular. It seems to fluctuate quite wildly, the reactions you get. But for me, I think the games are really stagnant now and not as exciting as they were. I think this season's had an abundance of very boring, one-sided games, and they're not quick either. They're not short games.
No, that's the biggest problem right now. Riot refuses to acknowledge that they've made some huge mistakes in the past 6 months or 8 months, basically, when it comes to game balance. Before, they had these, like in 2013, you had these games where you could basically carry a game alone from the mid lane, which obviously wasn't right either. Like, it doesn't make any sense that when you play your game in the bottom lane as AD carry and you're 2-0, and the enemy mid laner is 2-0, that you die without, having the ability to do anything about it. That was stupid as well. Mm-hmm. But now it's basically come to these games where unless you cheese, you're not going to win before 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, it's often just who makes the first big mistake that loses rather than who makes the best play. It's a lot more rewarding to play defensively and not make any plays than it is to try to make these special tactics and special plays to win the games. Because if you make one mistake, that's like a dragon. If you lose a dragon mid game and early game, it just gives you way too much gold. You see it happen so much. Like, these mid laners will die 1v1 in laner and go like 0-2, and bot lane will go 0-2, and then they get one dragon, and then all of that is suddenly erased.
Do you think that this is part of a problem in that they're constantly trying to balance the solo queue experience, but actually for high level play, that is sort of contradictory to having a interesting and exciting interesting, exciting league?
Well, from what I experienced, because I played the game myself at not LCS level by a long shot, Diamond 1 ish. So I know how the game works. Aside from just knowing how the champions work, I know how to play the game as well. So I experienced it, and I honestly think at this point it's a lack of know-how. Like, I think the teams that decide how the game is balanced just are running out of ideas, or just don't play the game themselves. Because when you play, I don't understand how you can have a full-time team that gets paid like a proper master's university degree, and then you have the same champion, Kassadin, banned for more than a year at this point in time. They don't manage to balance one single champion, so I don't understand how these developers are still there. At some point, they're gonna have to look to other places and maybe find some actual high-rated players. Because when I talk to some of these developers, they're silver players. They're not even gold.
Yeah.
How do you expect someone who doesn't know how to play the game properly to balance it? It's a little beyond me.
I mean, I've often thought, like, it's almost an admission that they don't want to remove certain champions. And if I remember rightly, I think back in the day, for old school Dota, they removed heroes. Like each patch, like you didn't know necessarily who was going to be still in there. They did remove some heroes. It was part of an ongoing balance. I mean, they consistently balanced the game anyway and changed heroes that were obviously overpowered or whatever. But some heroes did get completely removed. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it's almost like Riot don't want to have to be in a position where it's like, you know what? We've tried everything with Kassadin, but ultimately he doesn't belong in the game. We just can't make it work. We either make him too weak and there's no point 'cause we don't pick him, or we have his kit working appropriately, but it's too strong and he can't be in the game. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think this is where shareholders kick in. With Dota, you didn't have the problem that, you've got $1 billion company, you have to make your profits, and especially the people that they have to show the numbers to at the end of the day, they're not going to understand that Kassadin isn't balanced, so they had to remove him, which means that they made $100,000 less. Just random number.
Yeah.
I think that's a big problem as well, because for example, when there's a bug in the client, it'll take weeks, months, or even years, or never with some bugs to get fixed. But when there's a problem with the shop, it'll take maximum 25 minutes. I think that obviously that's what's going to happen when you run a company. Like, you have your priorities, but to some extent, I think sometimes you have to lose some money to make more money, because the LCS is just insanely boring. I haven't watched more than 3 games in the past 2 months, because it's just basically what you do is you look at who's playing, you know what players are going to make what mistakes. Like, that if SK loses, it's because Jesses or Canny Panda mispositioned or misplayed. And basically all you have to do to predict who's going to win is you look at champion select, you look what champions they have, and then I think I've got like 90% right so far, because it's really, there's like, for right now, it's basically, if you have Kog'Maw, that's 40% chance of winning, just that champion alone. If you have Kog'Maw and Morgana, it's like 70%. If you have Kog'Maw and Nami, and the other team doesn't have Morgana, then I think it's like 100% at this point in time. And that's like a big problem I foresee right now, is that these teams, they aren't pushed to be the best. There's no reason for, say, a Millennium or a Super Hot Crew to be the best, because they know eventually they're not going to be the Lions because, lack of talent, I guess, maybe? Lack of skill. So what they do is they perform just enough to stay in the LCS reliably. So they don't improve, and these games are just boring because they just copy what Alliance does or copy what Korean teams do. And it works. Obviously, it works to some extent. But they don't adapt to the patches and stuff fast enough. And I think the main problem with that is that Riot doesn't force teams to have coaches or analysts. I think going towards the next season, if Riot wants to make the game better and more interesting, they should put the same clause in each contract or each team agreement as they have now for the starting players. That, you need 5 starting players, 1 general manager, 2 substitutes, and 1 coach/analyst. Because when, for example, the games Millennium played against SK just this week, they lost 2 out of 3 games in Champion Select because they completely fucked up their drafting.
Yeah.
And I talked to Creaton after the game, today actually. And I told him, if you had an analyst, you wouldn't have lost those first 2 games. And he says, yeah, it's true, you're right, but we can't find anyone because the people that want to, properly become coaches or analysts, first of all, you have to be smart. You have to know a lot about the game. You don't want to have the ambition to become pro yourself.
Yeah.
And you need to have the time and commitment. And to get those players, like I worked with a certain North American team and a top NA team after I left NIP. But if they can't pay you, then I'm not going to devote 10 hours say 5 hours of my time every day to making that team the best.
Yeah.
If you don't want to spend money on good coaches and good analysts, you're going to be stuck in the same stale game for the next 10 years. Nothing's going to change.
So what do you make of the current state then of analysis and coaching? I did another podcast a few weeks ago with a guy called Robert Yip, and he is a sports psychologist who's done a lot of great work in StarCraft, and he's been looking to get involved in League of Legends, and he's been saying that in his opinion, he thinks part of the problem is that people are looking to ex-pro players a bit too much, and also as well, they're not looking at actual sort of qualifications over, perhaps reputations. I don't know what you think about it.
I think he hits the nail on the head. Like these, especially the fans, they have this idea that an ex-pro player, keep in mind this pro player was not good enough to remain a pro player, is somehow going to make this magical analyst / coach that knows everything about the game and is going to help their favorite team become the best in the world. That's this illusions these fans have, because I understand they want their favorite players to stay relevant, but if you want to become an analyst, it's not just about the game. You need to be able to watch these games and watch like hours and hours of VODs and draw the right conclusions. And you need to be able to do, well, I'm not going to say university level math, but college level math at least, to find out what the best builds, what the best runes and masteries are. You need to be able to calculate how much GPM you make at what point in the game. And half of these players don't even know how to establish a proper spreadsheet in Excel, and then they want them to become analysts, and it just doesn't work. There might be one odd player out of every 100 that's able to do it, but most of them just say, just look at Korean solo queue, and then they say, oh, this champion's overpowered, and 1 out of 10 they'll get it right. And then, people refuse to think for themselves. Even some of the more reputable coaches, they put Koreans on these pedestals, and instead of trying to find the new good stuff themselves, they'll say, oh no, it's not good because it's not played in Korea. And then they sort of forget that Kassadin wasn't played for 5 months there when he was permanently banned in Europe, and then they played him 1 game in Korea 6 months later because they refused to play it, because they refused to watch Europeans. And ever since then, he's basically been banned every single game, just like in Europe and North America.
So what do you think makes you so good at this then? Well, why do you think you can pursue a career in being a coach and an analyst for a League of Legends team? Because I saw you tweet some stuff out relating to the Gambit games about picks and bans, like a little document.
Well, mostly just because, it's going to be hard to say this without sounding arrogant.
I know, I've set you up, sorry.
I'm walking right into a trap card here. I know a lot about math. I know how the game works, essentially, because I know how the code works. So I know, for example, that Corki has the shortest wind-up time of any AD carry, which means that at very low attack speed with Corki, you'll be able to orb walk without losing any units on your movement. Whereas other people, they'll just, kind of look at the pros and what they build and why, and they'll never think outside the box. They'll never do the math, which is something I really, I think is super important. When you look at economics, for example, it's all math. It's like 1% intuition and then 99% math.
Yeah.
It's super important in basically everything that has to be taken seriously. No, I put that a little more. If you want to make something statistically viable, and you want to, draw your conclusions from 100 or 200 games, then there's a lot of math that comes into play and a lot of variables. Rather than, you can take a notepad and write down the name every single time and then win or lose, but that's not viable because there's 117 champions. It's going to take you 1,000 hours to do that for 5 champions. So I think it's important that you're good at math and that you know the game inside out. And while you have to be a little intelligent as well, and be able to identify these. Why won't Fizz mid lane work with Ezreal bot lane, or these, like, why can't I play Orianna mid and then play Jax top? You need to know how the game works and know that if you have like an engaged like Orianna mid, you need someone to jump in top. That's like the most standard example I can think of. But I remember last split there were these teams, they would play Zac top lane. That was in summer split. And then they would play stuff like Zed mid lane. So what would happen is Zac is the initiator, he would jump in, and then there would be absolutely no one to follow up. So Zac just dies, and then they would lose the game. And they were like, how is that possible? We're 4-0 mid lane, 2-0 top lane, we still lose team fights. These actually very basic things that people don't take into account.
So, I mean, are you looking to, pitch for work? Are you trying to get back into it?
If I can get paid what I want for it, then I will. I already had a lot of offers, but nothing that's worth my while, basically, because I'm doing a lot of work on the side. So if I do it, I want it to be lucratively interesting as well. My one and only plan right now, unless another offer comes up, is if Incarnation is unbanned, I'm going to see where he goes, and there's a bit of an unwritten agreement between us, then I'll basically follow him wherever he goes, and we'll make the best out of it there.
Awesome.
So if he doesn't get unbanned, I'm probably, unless something great comes along, I'm not going to pursue anything else in League of Legends. But it does look like he's going to be unbanned, although that's entirely up to Riot at this point. So maybe in the future I'll, come back to the League of Legends scene, maybe as a team owner rather than just an analyst and a coach.
Okay, so we're winding down now. I've kept you long enough, and we are coming to the end. But I got two last questions. So the first thing is, I know obviously that we've talked a lot about Incarnation, his ban situation. I've been dying to ask you just what you thought of the whole XJ9 thing, because I wanted to get him on a podcast, and we got told by Super Hot Crew stroke Team Acer, please no media for him, because
honestly, I think that guy just has mental issues.
Okay.
I think he needs some serious help, because there's some, like, if you look what he did, like impersonating people and trying to get girls to like him by making shit up. I think he's a little like socially handicapped. I don't think he's like nearly the same case as Incarnation, for example.
No, I don't either, and obviously they get paired together because there's not been many people who've been told you are banned, indefinitely.
Yeah, well, I honestly don't know much about him besides that he's a really weird guy, and I don't think not having him around is a big problem. I don't think it's a big loss for League of Legends, contrary to like Incarnation, for example.
And here's the final bit, right? Because you've talked about how you are a sublime analyst, someone who knows the game inside out. I want to get your thoughts about how you see playoffs going in Europe in particular, and any thoughts about what might happen with the teams that go to Worlds.
In Europe, I think it's definitely Alliance and Fnatic. Alliance because they're just playing really good, like all 5 players. Like Wicked finally got his shit together. Like he's playing good as well now. Even, like in the spring split, he was the big problem. Like he would underperform literally every game and make these weird builds that didn't make any sense. But he's playing good now, so I think Alliance is gonna win the playoffs in Europe, and Fnatic's probably gonna take 1 or 2 games off them in the finals. And at Worlds, I honestly think that Fnatic and Alliance have a pretty good chance, because I talked to one of the members of Fnatic, Reckless, who's by far the best AD carry in Europe right now. And from what I can tell, I think they both have a good shot at making top 3. I'm not sure about winning, because that's still a long way off, and maybe there'll be another patch at that point, which changes everything again. But I don't think it'll be the same as last time around, where NA and U are just kind of relevant.
So let's talk about NA as well, just before I let you go, since you surmised that quite succinctly. How do you see the NA teams panning out?
Well, CLG went to Korea now to boot camp, which is pretty hilarious because I don't think it's going to happen at all. Like, their problems had nothing to do with scrims.
Right.
I think that's like one of these classic examples of Korea is heaven and everything else is shit. I think they should have just stayed in NA and worked on their actual issues rather than make these PR moves to like practice in Korea. I think they're going to come back. They're going to beat Curse and they're going to lose to C9. As far as the rest goes, probably LMQ and C9 going to Worlds. There's 3 spots, right?
Yeah,
there's 3. So I think LMQ, C9, TSM are going to go to Worlds, and they're all going to lose pretty quickly. Maybe not LMQ, but everyone else is going to lose pretty quickly.
Okay. I think that's fair enough. We'll be able to come back to this and see if you were right or not. And obviously, who's going to win? The whole thing, the whole Worlds.
Hold on 1 second. Let's see. They're called White now. Yeah, Samsung White. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always forget what they're called because they rename.
Yeah, they rename all the time.
Yeah,
can't
like,
keep up with them.
Mata and Pawn and Dandy and Imp basically. Imp is like the second best because Deft is a little better in my opinion. But they're all like the best players in their role. It's like SKT 1K, but a little more stable from last year. So I think it might be like Samsung White first place, and then maybe Alliance or Fnatic 2 and 3. Actually, I think it's actually possible. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened. I don't think it's very likely, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, well look, I'm definitely going to come back and revisit these predictions at the end, see how many you got right, see if you can stick to your 90% ratio. But the main thing is just thanks a lot for coming on. I always appreciate your candor. And I wish you all the best. The idea of you setting up a team with Incarnation and perhaps a few other well-known players that you've established relationships with over the years, I think is quite intriguing. I'm sure a lot of fans are going to monitor that situation.
Yeah, but, great.
Yeah, but whatever happens, and it's been great talking to you.
It was a nice interview. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So there we go. That was Olly Debeuf talking about his adventures in the wonderful world of League of Legends. We're going to obviously I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but hopefully it's in a timely fashion. But I don't know who we're going to have next week, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be awesome. And we'll try and do some more League of Legends related ones in future. This podcast was, of course, brought to you by Mad Cats. I am telling you that from the bottom of my heart to go and support them if you enjoy this content. They don't sponsor much, but they sponsor me. And if you want to take a further look at what we were talking about at the start, the Mad Catz Rat Tournament Edition gaming mouse for PC and Mac, you can do so by going to their website. And if you click on madcats.com/products-page/ you can have a look at everything they make. They don't just make PC stuff, they do stuff for consoles as well. Their fight sticks are awesome. So definitely check them out and support them. And until next week, that was me. That was the Richard Lewis Esports podcast. See you next time.
The Richard Lewis Esports Podcast. Taking you behind the scenes of the esports industry.